I heard my son rehearsing my funeral speech 3 days before I was supposed to die. I stood frozen at the top of the staircase, my hand resting against the polished oak railing Henry had installed himself nearly 30 years ago. Down below, soft jazz drifted through the study, mixing with the low murmur of Ryan's voice. At first, I thought he was on a business call. My son was always speaking in that polished courtroom tone now, calm and practiced, the kind of voice that made strangers trust him instantly. But then I heard my own name. My mother was a graceful woman, Ryan said slowly, as if testing the words. She spent her final years surrounded by family and comfort. There was a pause, followed by Vanessa's laugh, soft and sharp like the clink of crystal glasses. That sounds better, she said. More emotional. People love emotional. I felt something cold settle into my chest. Not panic, not grief. Something quieter than that. The kind of silence that comes right before a storm reaches the shoreline. I should explain something. 3 months earlier, after my husband Henry passed away from heart failure, Ryan started visiting almost every day. Before that, weeks could pass without a phone call. Suddenly, he wanted to handle my groceries, organize my medications, even refill the tea jars in my kitchen. Vanessa insisted it was because they were worried about me living alone in a 14,000 square foot house at 72. You shouldn't have to manage all this by yourself anymore, she kept saying with that perfect sympathetic smile. At first, I believed her. Grief makes you want to believe kindness is still real. But little things started changing. My morning tea tasted slightly bitter some days. I began sleeping through entire afternoons without meaning to. Once, I woke up in the den with the television still glowing blue against the dark walls and realized nearly 7 hours had disappeared. Vanessa blamed stress. Ryan blamed age. You need to rest, Mom. He told me one evening while adjusting the throw blanket across my lap, like I was already fragile enough to break. But Henry used to say something about instincts. When people start treating you differently overnight, he'd tell me, pay attention to what they gain from it. Standing there above the study, listening to my son rehearse the words he planned to say after I was gone, I finally understood what they were gaining. $4.5 million. The beach property in Cape Cod. Henry's investment accounts. The house. Everything. Vanessa spoke again downstairs. Do you think she suspects anything? Ryan let out a quiet chuckle. Mom trusts me. She always has. I closed my eyes for a moment. Not because I was hurt. That feeling had already passed weeks ago, somewhere between the sleeping spells and the way Vanessa had started reorganizing my closets without asking. No, what I felt now was clarity. Clean and sharp. The kind that arrives when illusion finally dies. Slowly, carefully, I reached into the pocket of my cashmere cardigan and pulled out my phone. My hands were steady as I pressed record. Downstairs, Ryan continued practicing my eulogy while Vanessa corrected certain phrases to make him sound more grieving, more loving, more believable. I listened quietly from the shadows of the staircase, recording every word. And for the first time since Henry died, I stopped feeling like an old woman waiting for her family to care for her. I started feeling like a witness. The next morning, I sat alone in the breakfast room watching the rain slide down the tall kitchen windows Henry had imported from Vermont nearly 20 years earlier. The house always sounded different during storms. Larger somehow. Hollow. The grandfather clock in the hallway echoed through the silence with slow, deliberate clicks that reminded me too much of hospital monitors. I wrapped both hands around my teacup, but did not drink from it immediately. That had become a habit now. Waiting. Observing. Vanessa moved around the kitchen with effortless confidence, wearing cream-colored cashmere and gold bracelets that chimed softly each time she reached for a cabinet. She no longer asked where things belonged. She acted as though the house had already become hers. You should eat something, Evelyn, she said while placing a plate of toast beside me. You barely touched dinner last night. Her tone sounded warm enough, but there was something rehearsed underneath it. Like an actress delivering the same line for the 100th time. Ryan walked in moments later, loosening his tie even though it was barely 8 in the morning. He kissed Vanessa on the cheek and smiled at me with practiced concern. How did you sleep, Mom? Fine, I answered quietly. No dizziness? Vanessa asked before I could butter my toast. I looked up at her. Should there have been? The question hung in the room for half a second too long. Ryan reached for the coffee pot quickly. Vanessa just worries about you. Of course she did. That was the performance now. worry, protection, care. It was all wrapped so neatly that anyone looking from the outside would have admired them for their devotion. A successful son, a thoughtful daughter-in-law, caring for the elderly widow after her husband passed away. People loved stories like that. They never looked closely enough to notice the cracks. I finally lifted the teacup to my lips, but stopped when a faint chemical smell reached me beneath the chamomile. Not strong, almost invisible, but enough. Slowly, I lowered the cup back onto the saucer. Vanessa noticed immediately. "Too hot?" she asked with a smile. "I think I have gotten picky in my old age," I replied. Ryan laughed softly, but his eyes stayed fixed on the untouched tea. That frightened me more than anything. Not anger, not cruelty. Attention, careful attention. The kind people give to things they desperately need to go according to plan. After breakfast, Vanessa offered to organize my medications again. She had started doing that a month earlier after claiming I had accidentally skipped a dose of blood pressure medicine. At the time, I appreciated the help. Now I washed her hands too carefully to ignore the way she hesitated before placing certain pills into the weekly organizer. "You really should consider assisted living eventually," she said casually while standing at the marble kitchen counter. "This house is becoming too much responsibility." I folded a dish towel slowly between my hands. "Henry built this house for us." "I know," Vanessa replied quickly. "But things change." "Yes, they did." I remembered the first Christmas after Ryan graduated law school. He stood in this very kitchen hugging me so tightly I could barely breathe, while promising he would always take care of me one day. Back then, his eyes still looked honest. Back then, Vanessa was not part of our lives yet. Sometimes betrayal does not arrive all at once. Sometimes it enters quietly, carrying flowers and complimenting your curtains while it studies the locks on your doors. That afternoon, while Vanessa was upstairs taking a phone call, I walked into the pantry and opened the small silver trash bin beneath the sink. My hands trembled only slightly as I reached inside and pulled out the tea bag from my untouched cup. I wrapped it carefully inside a napkin and placed it into my sweater pocket just as Ryan's voice echoed from the hallway. "Mom," he called. "Where are you?" I closed the pantry door gently and smiled before turning around. "Right here, sweetheart." That evening, I drove across town for the first time in weeks without telling Ryan where I was going. The sky above Hartford had already turned deep gray, and the streetlights reflected off the wet pavement in long shimmering streaks. Henry always loved driving in the rain. He said the world looked more honest when the sunlight disappeared. I parked outside a small medical office building near St. Francis Hospital and sat in the car for a moment with the engine running. My hands rested quietly on the steering wheel while I watched people hurry through the drizzle carrying umbrellas and paper coffee cups. Ordinary lives. Ordinary evenings. It struck me suddenly how strange it was that my own life no longer felt ordinary at all. 3 months ago, my biggest concern had been whether the hydrangeas near the back patio would survive another New England winter. Now I was hiding tea bags in my coat pocket like evidence in some courtroom drama my son would probably know how to win. The thought almost made me smile. Almost. Margaret Hayes opened the office door before I even reached it. She pulled me into a gentle hug that smelled faintly of lavender lotion and hospital disinfectant. Margaret had been my closest friend for over 40 years. She was also a retired nurse practitioner who trusted facts more than emotions. That was exactly why I came to her. "You look tired," she said softly while leading me into her small consultation room. "I have not been sleeping well." That part, at least, was true. I sat across from her beneath fluorescent lights that made everything feel too sharp and exposed. For a moment, I considered lying, pretending I was simply grieving, pretending none of this was happening. But something inside me had already crossed a line the night I heard Ryan rehearsing my funeral speech. There was no going back to denial after that. Quietly, I removed the folded napkin from my purse and placed it on the desk between us. Margaret frowned slightly. "What is this?" "Tea," I answered. "From this morning." She looked at me carefully then. Really looked at me. "Evelyn," she said slowly, "what exactly are you worried about?" I stared at the rain sliding down the dark office windows behind her. "I think someone may be giving me something I did not ask to take." The room fell silent except for the hum of the air conditioner overhead. Margaret did not react dramatically. That was one of the things I loved most about her. She simply unfolded the napkin carefully and examined the damp tea bag inside. "How long have you been feeling strange?" About 6 weeks. Sleeping more. I nodded. Dizziness. Sometimes. Confusion. I hesitated before answering. Only when Vanessa brings me tea. Margaret leaned back slowly in her chair. I watched the concern settle across her face piece by piece. Not panic. Recognition. Have you seen your primary doctor recently? She asked. Ryan canceled my last appointment. He said I was too exhausted to go. That seemed to disturb her more than anything else I had said. She stood up immediately and carried the tea bag into a back room without another word. While she was gone, I studied the framed family photos lining her bookshelf. Children, grandchildren, beach vacations, Christmas mornings, lives built on trust. Henry used to tell me that family was the one place people should never have to earn safety. Looking back now, I wondered if that belief had simply made me easier to deceive. Margaret returned nearly 15 minutes later, holding a small plastic evidence container. Her expression had changed completely. I cannot prove anything yet, she said carefully. But I want you to stop consuming anything prepared by Vanessa until we know more. I kept my face calm even as my stomach tightened. You found something? Margaret lowered her voice. Enough to make me uncomfortable. Outside, thunder rolled faintly across the city. I looked down at my wedding ring and turned it slowly around my finger the way I always did when thinking about Henry. Then I lifted my eyes back to Margaret. If they believe I suspect them, I said quietly, they will stop making mistakes. Margaret stared at me for a long moment before asking the question neither of us truly wanted answered. Evelyn, how far do you think this has already gone? I thought about Ryan practicing my eulogy downstairs while Vanessa corrected his tone like they were preparing for a dinner party instead of my death. Then I answered honestly, farther than a mother should ever have to imagine. When I returned home that night, every light in the house was on. The chandeliers glowed against the tall cathedral ceilings, casting warm golden reflections across the marble floors Henry once insisted were too fancy for normal people. He used to laugh whenever he said it. The house never felt extravagant when he was alive. It felt full. Now it only felt staged, like a showroom pretending to be a home. Ryan was standing in the foyer when I stepped through the front door, one hand tucked into the pocket of his tailored navy coat. His expression looked calm, but I noticed how quickly his eyes moved across my face, searching for something. Weakness, perhaps. Confusion. Signs that whatever they had been doing was working. Where were you? He asked gently. Too gently. I went for a drive. At night. Vanessa appeared from the dining room carrying a glass of sparkling water with lemon. You should have called someone. We were worried. There it was again. That word. Worried. They wore concern the way some people wear expensive perfume. Constantly. Thick enough to cover what lingered underneath. I handed Vanessa my coat and watched her carefully as she placed it into the hallway closet. She had become very comfortable here. More comfortable than Ryan, honestly. She moved through the rooms with the confidence of ownership, as though she had already memorized where every painting would hang after I was gone. I lost track of time, I said quietly. It happens at my age. Ryan relaxed slightly at that. I could see it in the way his shoulders loosened. They wanted frailty. They needed it. The stronger I appeared, the less control they had. Dinner was already waiting in the formal dining room. Pot roast, garlic mashed potatoes, green beans with almonds. Vanessa smiled proudly as she adjusted the linen napkin beside my plate. Your favorite, she said. Henry's favorite, actually. But I did not correct her. I sat down slowly while Ryan poured red wine into crystal glasses imported from Italy decades earlier. He raised his glass toward me with a soft smile. To family, he said. I looked at him across the candlelight. My son. The little boy who used to crawl into our bed during thunderstorms because he was afraid of lightning. The teenager who cried when Henry taught him how to shave for the first time because he accidentally cut his chin. It is strange how memory works during betrayal. Your mind keeps trying to rescue old versions of people who no longer exist. To family, I repeated quietly. I barely touched the food. Instead, I spent most of dinner listening. Ryan talked about estate taxes. Vanessa mentioned how difficult large properties become for widows to maintain alone. Neither topic sounded accidental. They circled my future the way lawyers circle contracts, slowly narrowing possibilities until only one outcome remains. At one point, Vanessa reached across the table and squeezed my hand. You know we only want what is best for you, she said softly. Her fingers felt cold against mine. I know, I replied. And somehow that answer unsettled her more than resistance would have. Later that evening, after they believed I had gone upstairs to bed, I paused halfway down the second-floor hallway when I heard voices drifting up from the kitchen below. Vanessa sounded irritated. She barely drank anything tonight. Ryan lowered his voice, but not enough. Then increase it tomorrow. My heartbeat slowed instead of quickened. That surprised me. Fear had already passed. What remained now was calculation. I stepped quietly into Henry's old study and closed the door behind me. The room still smelled faintly of cedarwood and old books. His reading glasses remained exactly where he left them the week before he died. I sat at his desk and opened the bottom drawer where he used to keep important documents. Inside, beneath old insurance papers and faded property records, rested a small digital recorder Henry carried during business meetings for years. I turned it over slowly in my hand before pressing the power button. A tiny red light flickered alive inside the dark study. Downstairs, I could still hear Ryan and Vanessa talking softly about medication schedules and legal paperwork, while rain tapped gently against the windows overlooking the backyard. I placed the recorder beside me on the desk and stared out into the darkness beyond the glass. Then, for the first time since this nightmare began, I started making a plan. The following morning, I woke before sunrise and sat quietly beside the bedroom window watching pale blue light spread across the empty gardens behind the house. Henry used to wake early every Saturday to trim the hedges himself, even after we could easily afford landscapers. If you stop taking care of the things you love, he always said, someone else eventually takes them from you. At the time, I thought he was talking about houses. Now I understood he was talking about people too. The digital recorder rested on the nightstand beside me, its small red light blinking softly in the darkness. I had listened to the conversation from downstairs 3 times before dawn. Each replay stripped away another layer of denial I did not realize I was still carrying. Ryan's voice sounded calm while discussing dosage adjustments. Vanessa sounded impatient, almost annoyed by how slowly things were progressing. There was something deeply chilling about hearing cruelty spoken casually. Not shouted, not emotional, just practical, like discussing weather forecasts or grocery lists. Around 8 o'clock, I heard footsteps approaching my bedroom door followed by 2 gentle knocks. Mom, Ryan called softly. Are you awake? I slipped the recorder beneath a stack of books before answering. Come in. He entered carrying a breakfast tray himself this time. Fresh fruit, toast, coffee, tea, always tea. Vanessa thought you could use breakfast in bed, he said with a warm smile. His father had the same smile. That was perhaps the cruelest part of all this. Betrayal looks different when it carries familiar eyes. I pushed myself upright slowly against the pillows while Ryan set the tray across my lap. You do not have to take care of me like this, I said quietly. I want to, he replied immediately. Too quickly, almost rehearsed. His gaze drifted toward the untouched sleeping pills on my bedside table. Vanessa had started leaving them there every evening despite the fact that I never once asked for help sleeping before Henry died. Did you take your medication last night? He asked casually. I think so. That answer seemed to satisfy him. Confusion comforted them. Forgetfulness reassured them. I reached for the teacup carefully while Ryan watched from the edge of the bed pretending to scroll through emails on his phone. The smell reached me immediately. Slightly sweet, slightly artificial beneath the chamomile. I lifted the cup just enough for steam to rise against my face before setting it back down untouched. I think my stomach feels unsettled this morning, I murmured. Ryan looked disappointed for only half a second. But I saw it. Maybe later, he said. After he left the room, I carried the tea directly into the bathroom and poured it slowly down the sink. Then I rinsed the cup carefully until no trace remained. By noon, Vanessa was rearranging drawers in the upstairs hallway while speaking loudly on the phone to someone about real estate values in Cape Cod. She stopped talking the moment she noticed me standing nearby. Oh, she said with a bright smile. I did not hear you there. I have noticed. Her expression flickered briefly before smoothing itself again. Small moments like that began revealing more than their conversations ever could. The impatience behind the politeness. The greed beneath the concern. That afternoon, I drove alone to Daniel Brooks's office downtown, carrying the recorder inside my handbag wrapped in an old silk scarf. Daniel had handled Henry's legal affairs for almost 25 years. He stood when I entered his office and immediately frowned. Evelyn, he said carefully, You look troubled. I sat down slowly across from his desk and placed the recorder between us without a word. Daniel stared at it for several seconds before looking back at me. What am I about to hear? I folded my gloves neatly into my lap. The end of my family, I answered quietly. For the next 18 minutes, neither of us spoke while Ryan and Vanessa's voices filled the office describing medication schedules, inheritance timelines, and funeral preparations for a woman who was still very much alive. When the recording ended, the room felt colder somehow. Daniel removed his glasses slowly and rubbed one hand across his face. My God, he whispered under his breath. I sat perfectly still. I need you to rewrite everything, I told him. The will, the trust, medical authority, everything. Daniel nodded once. Done. Outside his office window, people hurried through the busy Hartford sidewalks carrying coffees and briefcases beneath the pale winter sun. Ordinary lives continuing forward without realizing that mine had just divided itself permanently into before and after. For the next several days, I became the version of myself they wanted to see. I moved slower through the house. I pretended to forget small details. Once, I asked Ryan what day it was even though I already knew perfectly well it was Thursday. Another time, I stood in the kitchen staring at an empty cabinet until Vanessa rushed over with that carefully rehearsed concern in her voice. Are you all right, Evelyn? She asked while guiding me gently toward a chair. I just feel tired lately, I murmured. The relief that flashed across her face lasted less than a second, but I caught it anyway. People reveal themselves most clearly when they believe they are finally winning. Ryan started visiting even more often after that. He canceled business lunches, took calls from my living room, brought folders full of legal documents into the study, and spoke constantly about simplifying my finances for my protection. One rainy afternoon, he sat beside me near the fireplace while football played quietly on television in the background. Mom, he said carefully, have you thought any more about assigning power of attorney? I wrapped both hands around my coffee mug and kept my eyes on the flames. Henry always handled those things. Exactly, Ryan replied softly. And now someone needs to help you. Help. Such an innocent word for something so dangerous. I nodded slowly as if considering it seriously. Maybe you are right. His entire posture changed at those words. Not dramatically, just enough. His shoulders eased. His breathing slowed. Predators relax once prey stops running. We can discuss it tomorrow, he said gently. No pressure. That evening, Vanessa prepared homemade chicken soup and insisted I eat every bite. I spent most of dinner pretending not to notice the way they exchanged quick glances whenever I rubbed my temples or closed my eyes for too long. They had started monitoring symptoms the way gardeners monitor weather forecasts. Quietly, constantly, patiently waiting for results. After dinner, I carried my untouched tea upstairs and emptied it into the bathroom sink again. The liquid swirled down the drain in pale golden circles beneath the bright vanity lights. I stared at my reflection in the mirror afterward and barely recognized the woman staring back at me. Not because I looked older. I already knew grief had aged me. No. What unsettled me was the calmness in my own eyes. Somewhere along the way, fear had disappeared entirely. There was only patience left now. Patience and memory. The following afternoon, Daniel called while Ryan was outside speaking to a landscaper near the front driveway. I stepped into the laundry room and shut the door quietly behind me before answering. Everything is finalized, Daniel said in a low voice. The revised trust is secure. Ryan no longer controls anything directly. I closed my eyes briefly. And the recording? Multiple copies. Protected legally. Good. I thanked him softly before hanging up. When I turned around, Vanessa was standing in the doorway holding folded towels against her chest. Neither of us spoke immediately. Was that Daniel Brooks? She asked casually. I smiled faintly. He was an old friend of Henry's. Her expression remained pleasant, but something sharp flickered behind her eyes. Suspicion. The first crack in their confidence. What did he want? She asked. To check on me. I walked past her slowly, brushing one hand along the hallway wall for balance, as if exhaustion still weighed down every movement. Vanessa watched me carefully all the way back toward the living room. That night, after they believed I had gone to sleep, I heard voices drifting faintly through the air vents from downstairs again. Ryan sounded irritated this time. Something feels off, he muttered. She has been acting strange. Vanessa lowered her voice. You are being paranoid. Maybe. Silence followed for several long seconds before Ryan spoke again. Still, move up the dinner. My hand tightened slightly around the blanket resting across my lap. Downstairs, cabinet doors opened softly. Glasses clinked against marble counters. Somewhere deep inside the house, the old grandfather clock began striking midnight one slow note at a time while I stared into the darkness of my bedroom and realized they were finally running out of patience. The dinner was scheduled for Saturday night. Vanessa called it a small family evening and spent the entire day preparing the house as though important guests were arriving. Fresh flowers appeared on the dining room table. Candles lined the marble fireplace. Soft piano music drifted through hidden ceiling speakers while the smell of rosemary and garlic filled the kitchen. Watching her move through the house felt strangely surreal. She looked less like a daughter-in-law and more like someone rehearsing ownership. Around 4 in the afternoon, Ryan stopped by my bedroom carrying a garment bag over one shoulder. "Thought you might like something. Elegant tonight," he said with a smile. Inside hung a pale blue dress I had worn years earlier during Henry's retirement gala in Boston. I ran my fingers gently across the fabric without speaking. Ryan leaned against the doorway, watching me carefully. "Dad always loved that color on you." For one painful second, the room blurred slightly around the edges. Not because of fear, because grief never truly leaves you. It only waits quietly inside ordinary moments. I remembered Henry standing behind me fastening the necklace that matched this dress, while teasing me for taking too long to get ready. 43 years of marriage reduced, now to memories sharp enough to cut through silence. "It is beautiful," I said softly. Ryan smiled with visible relief, mistaking sadness for surrender. "Good," he replied. "Tonight should feel special." Special. Such an unsettling word under the circumstances. After he left, I locked the bedroom door and sat slowly at my vanity mirror. The small digital recorder rested beside my jewelry box alongside an envelope Daniel delivered earlier that afternoon containing copies of every revised legal document. Safe. Protected. Finalized. I opened the top drawer and removed another object hidden beneath old photographs and handwritten Christmas cards from decades ago. Henry's silver fountain pen. He signed every important document with it until the day he died. I held it for a moment before slipping it carefully into my purse beside the recorder. Downstairs, I could hear Vanessa laughing while speaking on the phone. "Everything is ready," she said quietly. "By tomorrow, this entire mess should finally be over." Her voice floated upward through the staircase with terrifying calmness. Not cruelty. Confidence. That was what frightened me most about people like Ryan and Vanessa. They no longer believed they were doing something wrong. They believed they were solving a problem. By 7 o'clock, the dining room glowed warmly beneath crystal chandeliers while rain pressed softly against the tall windows overlooking the backyard gardens. Ryan poured wine. Vanessa adjusted silverware with obsessive precision. I descended the staircase slowly, one hand resting lightly against the railing while they both turned toward me at the exact same moment. For a brief second, neither of them spoke. I saw surprise cross Vanessa's face when she noticed the blue dress. Perhaps I looked less fragile than expected. "You look wonderful," Ryan said quietly. "Your father always liked this dress." I smiled faintly. I remember. Dinner began pleasantly enough. Too pleasantly. Ryan spoke about childhood memories. Vanessa asked gentle questions about Henry. They behaved exactly like loving family members gathered around a grieving widow. Anyone watching through the windows would have admired them. Halfway through the meal, Vanessa disappeared briefly into the kitchen before returning with a delicate porcelain teapot trimmed in gold. My heartbeat slowed the moment I saw it. That teapot belonged to Henry's mother. Vanessa only used it for important occasions. "Chamomile," she said warmly while pouring tea into my cup. "To help you sleep later." Steam curled softly into the candlelight between us. Ryan lifted his wine glass and studied me over the rim without realizing how transparent his expression had become to me now. Anticipation. That was the word for it. Quiet anticipation. I wrapped both hands around the warm teacup and brought it slowly toward my lips while the grandfather clock echoed somewhere deep inside the house. Tick, tick, tick. Vanessa smiled. Ryan watched carefully. And for the first time since this nightmare began, I realized something unexpected. They were nervous too. I lifted the teacup slowly and let the steam warm my face while Ryan watched from across the table pretending to sip his wine. Vanessa sat beside him with her hands folded neatly in her lap, her wedding ring catching the candlelight every time she moved. The rain outside had become heavier now, tapping steadily against the windows like quiet fingers. For a moment, none of us spoke. The silence itself felt staged somehow, stretched too tightly between us. I brought the cup close enough for my lips to touch the edge, then paused. "Do you remember the trip to Nantucket when Ryan was 10? I asked suddenly. Vanessa blinked, clearly caught off guard by the question. Ryan lowered his glass slowly. "What?" he asked. "The storm knocked the power out for 2 days," I continued softly. "Ryan was terrified of thunder back then. Henry spent the entire night pretending not to be scared so our son would feel safe." Ryan forced a small laugh. "I barely remember that." "I do," I said quietly. "Mothers remember things differently." His expression shifted slightly at that. Not guilt exactly. Discomfort. Sometimes memory itself becomes threatening to people who are trying to erase you. I finally tilted the teacup and let a small amount touch my lips before setting it carefully back onto the saucer. Vanessa's shoulders relaxed almost immediately. Tiny movements reveal everything once you know how to look. Dinner continued another 20 minutes. Ryan discussed investment markets. Vanessa talked about a charity gala downtown. They sounded almost cheerful now. Hopeful. Every few minutes, Ryan glanced toward my tea to make sure the level had lowered slightly. I made certain it did. Around 9 o'clock, I pressed one hand lightly against my forehead and leaned back in my chair. "I think I may be getting tired," I murmured. Vanessa stood immediately. "You should go upstairs and rest." Her voice carried too much eagerness beneath the concern. Ryan rose from his seat and walked around the table toward me. "Do you want help?" "No," I answered softly. "I can manage." I pushed my chair back slowly and steadied myself against the table just enough to maintain the illusion they wanted. Weak, but cooperative. Fragile, but trusting. Ryan watched every movement carefully while I made my way toward the staircase. Halfway up, I paused briefly and looked back down at them. Vanessa was already collecting dishes. Ryan stood near the fireplace with one hand resting against the mantel, his face unreadable in the dim light. For one impossible second, I wondered whether any part of him understood what he had become. Then he noticed me watching and smiled warmly. "Sleep well, Mom." I returned the smile. "You too, sweetheart." Upstairs, I closed my bedroom door quietly behind me and locked it for the first time since Henry died. My hands remained perfectly steady as I crossed the room and opened the bathroom sink cabinet beneath the vanity. Hidden behind spare towels sat the untouched contents of the teacup, sealed carefully inside a plastic container Margaret had provided earlier that afternoon. Evidence. I placed tonight's remaining tea beside the others and stared at the growing collection lined neatly in the cabinet. Different dates, different nights, different attempts. Outside my bedroom, faint footsteps moved quietly through the hallway before disappearing again downstairs. I removed the recorder from my purse and placed it on the nightstand beside Henry's old wristwatch. The tiny red light blinked softly in the darkness. Then I sat down at the edge of the bed and waited. Nearly 40 minutes later, I heard the bedroom doorknob turn gently. Once, twice, locked. Silence followed. Then came Vanessa's whisper from the hallway. "Maybe she is already asleep." Ryan answered so quietly I almost missed it. "Tomorrow morning, we finish this." My chest tightened slightly at the cold certainty in his voice. Not rage, not hesitation. Certainty. I waited until their footsteps disappeared completely before reaching for my phone beside the bed. Daniel answered on the second ring despite the late hour. "Evelyn," he said immediately. I stared toward the dark bedroom windows while rainwater streaked slowly down the glass. "It is time," I whispered. The next morning arrived strangely bright after so many days of rain. Sunlight spilled across the hardwood floors outside my bedroom, while the house below remained unusually quiet. I dressed slowly in cream slacks and a soft gray sweater Henry bought me years ago during a trip to Maine. Comfortable clothes. Steady clothes. The kind worn by people who expect to survive the day. When I walked downstairs, Ryan and Vanessa were already waiting in the kitchen. Fresh coffee brewed beside a tray of pastries Vanessa had arranged carefully on white porcelain plates. They both looked tired. Nervous people rarely sleep well before important moments. "Good morning," Ryan said cautiously. "How are you feeling?" I pulled out a chair at the breakfast table and sat down without answering. Immediately, Better than expected, I said at last. Vanessa poured coffee into my cup while watching my face too carefully. That is wonderful, she replied softly. Her smile looked thinner this morning, more fragile around the edges. I noticed Ryan glancing repeatedly toward the hallway clock mounted near the pantry, waiting for something or someone. At exactly 9 o'clock, the front doorbell echoed through the house. Ryan frowned immediately. Are you expecting company? Actually, I answered calmly while folding my napkin across my lap. I invited someone. Before either of them could respond, Daniel Brooks stepped into the kitchen carrying a slim black leather briefcase. Behind him came Margaret wearing a navy wool coat, still dusted with pale winter snow. The entire room changed instantly. Vanessa's smile disappeared first. Ryan stood slowly from his chair. What is this? He asked sharply. Daniel removed his gloves with deliberate calmness. Good morning, Ryan. Why are you here? Ryan demanded. I wrapped both hands around my coffee cup and finally looked directly at my son without pretending confusion or weakness anymore. Because I wanted witnesses. Silence crashed through the kitchen so heavily even the ticking clock on the wall suddenly sounded loud. Vanessa recovered first. Evelyn, she said carefully, if this is about legal paperwork, we could have discussed it privately. Privately, I repeated softly, like the conversations you thought I could not hear. Ryan's face drained of color almost instantly. Tiny changes reveal truth faster than words ever do. I reached into my sweater pocket and placed the digital recorder gently onto the kitchen table between the coffee cups and untouched pastries. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Daniel pressed a button. Ryan's voice filled the room first. Calm. Cold. Discussing medication increases. Funeral arrangements. Timelines. Then Vanessa's voice followed. Impatient and sharp beneath the polished charm, she showed the rest of the world. Tomorrow morning, we finish this. The recording ended. Outside the kitchen windows, snow drifted softly across the backyard gardens Henry once loved tending himself. Inside, nobody spoke for several long seconds. Ryan stared at the recorder as though it had become something alive. Vanessa looked at me differently now. Not with pity, not with fake concern. Fear. Real fear changes people quickly. Mom, Ryan said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. This is not what it sounds like. I looked at him quietly across the table. Then what does it sound like? He opened his mouth, but no words came out. Because